Hey guys, welcome to The Disruptors, the show where we get the world's folks focused on the future and making it awesome. Today we've got somebody who's focused on a slightly different side of the pie, but one that's incredibly important. Geoff Cook on the program. Geoff's co-founder and CEO of the Meet Group, among other things. Thanks for coming today, Geoff.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So I wanted to get started on let's just dive right into it. What do you think based off of, let's get a 30,000 foot overview of you and who you are first.
Okay, sure. So I guess going back to who I am, I have three kids. I live in Princeton, New Jersey. I run a public company called the Meet Group, traded on NASDAQ. It's a live streaming video and dating app. We also recently launched a Podcoin, a podcast related app. I got started in entrepreneurship back in sophomore year of college. I was going to Harvard. I was from South Plainfield High School. Was going to Harvard in 1997, started a little side business that I intended as a side business at the time, kind of this e-commerce editing platform that was really just an e-commerce editing website, and I was doing all the editing. And it turned out that I grew that to a few million in revenue, and then sold it eventually. Obviously, a lot of story in all of that. Started my second company, My Yearbook, with my brother and sister back in 2005. That went pretty well. Then sold that in 2011 for $100 million.
You started a business with your brother and sister, and it went well. What is the secret? I think that's where we have to go with this.
Got it. So, yeah. So I think the secret might be that I'm 10 and 11 years older. And they were actually high school students at the time. So we launched it in their high school in Skillman, New Jersey. They were 15, 16. I was, I guess, 26 or 27. And, I had already sold a company for millions of dollars prior to that. But what we were starting was a high school-based social network. Now, it turned out pretty quickly. Like within the first year, we went from high school-based social network to social network for meeting new people. Had nothing to do with high school. In fact, that feature, that website more or less still exists. Now it's called MeetMe, and it doesn't even allow teenagers to join it. But back in the early days when we were first starting out, it was a high school-based social network. And my sister and brother actually both still work with me for the company that we founded, all the way back in 2005. So 14 years ago. Catherine, my sister, she is head of brand. She essentially runs the marketing budget, which is significant at this point, tens of millions of dollars a year. And David, my brother, is managing the Podcoin app for us, which is an app we just started.
And you said you sold the company for $100 million. Obviously, you didn't get all of that, but that still sounds like life-changing money.
Yeah, it was a good deal, and it was a cash stock deal. And part of the reason, basically, I sold the company to an entity that was on NASDAQ. It's called Kpasa. And then we ended up moving all of that traffic that was on Kpasa to our app, which at the time was called MeetMe. And then I resumed kind of as CEO shortly thereafter. I think it was early 2013. And so for the last 6 years, been more or less doing the same thing as what we started. MeetMe is essentially another name for My Yearbook. We changed our name and said nothing changes but the name to the member. It was a good change, I think, to the user and to the external parties that were kind of interested in it. And lately, what we've been doing is spending a lot of our time working on building a live streaming video platform. We recently brought live streaming video to the MeetMe app, and then because live streaming video is such an important, it's such a big investment, right? You have to do moderation, you have to do tech. We decided to acquire some competitors, and so we actually acquired 4 different companies in the last 3 years. And in each case, we added our live streaming video platform to the property. So we've been basically buying social assets, enabling them with video, and turning on new revenue streams.
How do you deal with, I mean, I have to go there, even though I really wish I didn't. How do you deal with building a live streaming app in the era where people are deciding to kill people online and show it live?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, we do a lot with moderation. So it's a combination of algorithmic moderation, where you're actually scanning the streams in real time for content that violates your algorithms, and also a few hundred moderators are actually, their job is to watch streams. Of course, we also have the ability to report streams, but for the most part, we don't rely on that. It's really about being proactive and finding problematic content, as early as possible.
Is it physically possible once you reach that YouTube or Facebook scale?
I mean, it's physically possible to, you probably don't have humans watching every single stream, but algorithms are getting pretty good. And you tend to have humans watch the streams that humans probably should be watching, like maybe what's in the top 500 or top 1,000, or which videos are quickly changing in popularity. Like a video that quickly captures a lot of attention, maybe that's because there's something bad going on in it. And so I think you can actually cover quite a bit of, you won't be perfect, but I think most of the the social media kind of beyond video, photos and so forth, is also imperfect, right? There's always a possibility something's being posted that's not perfect. At the same time, I think for your high profile videos, your kind of very public, in the feed trending sort of videos, you can get pretty good coverage on them. And then nudity detection is pretty far advanced. So like for certain problems, AI does a very good job. And machine learning algorithms do a particularly good job. For others, it's less good.
Yeah, it's a slippery, challenging problem. What would you do now if you had to take over Facebook? Let's give you an impossible job. But
yeah, I think if I had to take over Facebook,
not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm I think what it starts with, like, well, what are some of the perceived problems with Facebook? And I think there's some perceived problems are, what are people doing there, right? So like, is it to connect with your friends and family, or is it to spend time in watch parties and waste potentially good amount of time? Is it to go down the rabbit hole of an echo chamber related to political views that you may hold and everyone that you see also holds? So I mean, I think clarifying maybe what it is that it's about would help. I think Facebook also delivers a lot of value, right? I think people get real value out of posting their photos, having their friends and family comment on them. I don't know that they get much value out of political conversations on the platform, frankly. So I mean, I'm glad I don't actually have to have that job. I'm sure it's a very difficult one, and I'm sure some very, very educated and well-minded, good-minded people kind of get into it. But it's also, it's the biggest. It's by far, it's basically a nation state in its like size, and bigger than that in its kind of scope. And so it's something that I think all of society has to kind of grapple with.
It's kind of the trope that they have about startups and building products. If you try to build something for everyone, you build something for no one. That's kind of where we're getting to with Facebook, in terms of once you have that kind of scale, it's kind of inconceivably problematic. What do you think the future is for social media?
I mean, in my day-to-day life, I certainly don't consider it inconceivably problematic. So I think that's certainly not been my experience of Facebook. But then again, I'm not the type of probably a person to be easily baited.
I mean, trying to solve the problem more so than the problem itself, and the scale of just what it's done in terms of changing public opinion and changing public discourse, and then trying to prevent. It's always easier to play offense than it is to play defense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the speed with which kind of opinion turned against Facebook was kind of head spinning, right? I don't know that anyone could have seen that speed of change coming. You might have thought, well, there's some, Tristan, was it Tristan Harris has a critique of tech and its many. For example, the notifiers, the bottomless bowl on the feed, things of that nature, kind of product insights into mobile tech that basically create habit-forming products. And I think the critique is essentially, well, maybe we don't want habit-forming products, right? Like that, keep that away from us. And we spend a lot of time talking about Facebook, but Facebook's playing in an ecosystem that's largely controlled by Google and Apple too, right? Who are providing the devices that the thing sits on, and wouldn't be providing uses the notifications and the notifiers that everyone else provides, and those companies all profit off of that. So I mean, it certainly doesn't strike me as a problem that's limited to Facebook. At the same time, I think it's a valid question. Should they ever have been allowed to buy Instagram? I think obviously the answer would be no if they were trying to do that deal now. I'm sure that would be blocked, but they didn't do it now. They did it then. And so whether or not it could be unwound, is a question for the politicians, I guess.
Yeah, it's a big question. Which monopoly scares you the most, and why?
That's an interesting question. Which monopoly? I mean, I'm sure all of them would say they're not monopolies. I think Facebook certainly has a big hand on all things social. If you're going to connect with your friends, if and you're not going to use Facebook, you're probably going to have to use Snapchat, right? Like, and that's only because they didn't buy it and they wanted to at the time. So at the same time, in terms of who's taxing these startups, right? That's Apple and Google, right? Like 30% tax off the top for Spotify and so forth. So, and this is an issue that's, raging. I think Match even talks about it, or basically anybody paying that tax, is wondering whether they get that sort of value out of it. And so if you look at who's taxing, it's Apple and Google, and not so much Facebook, although that's just the nature of their different business models.
It's also because they screwed all the old partners, so they don't have very many current partners.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at size, I mean, these things obviously tend towards network effects, right? The network effects are just massive, and so they're kind of naturally monopolistic, you could argue, right? I mean, the network effects in friends, friends network is massive. I don't want to join a network where my friends aren't to go do social networking with friends, right? It's straightforward. So you have kind of a monstrously large winner-take-all sort of scenario. Apple might have gotten the same thing if Google wasn't right there on the with the Android platform at the right moment. And now you have kind of this duopoly. So I think I think it's hard because I don't think any of these are, certainly none of those CEOs or probably any of the leadership is really evil of any of these companies. And it's just, they're executing against their plans to grow bigger. And, I think public policy needs to have a say in, what that means, right? Like, and I think public policy might have to catch up a little bit, right? And that's not maybe so surprising given how quickly these companies grew to such large scale.
Does it?
But if you look at size, like look at Amazon too. I mean, Amazon, has managed to take over a huge swath of e-commerce. Certainly not of all commerce, but certainly incredibly important. And at the same time, I'm not sure anyone could argue that there's price that the prices have gone up as a result of these monopoly efforts. So, I think companies will have to say, well, how, people who can say they're harmed by monopolistic practices are probably the ones that are getting taxed, because it's easier to draw a straight line to, well, I'm paying you all this money and, I'm doing all of this effort and you're taking, more than my margin. And that's kind of a straightforward sort of argument. Whereas I think you can still make an argument without resorting to prices, but then you're basically talking about stifling competition. And then it's fuzzy because it's like, well, I don't know what would have developed if it weren't for this large player here who either destroys or copies every innovation. And so, it's tough. There's no easy. I mean, it's almost a similar question to the big banks, right? Like, how big is too big, right? It's not just a tech problem. It seems like it's just a question of how big do we want our corporations to be?
As someone who's running a public market company, that's not an enormous public market company, does it scare you that Facebook or a company like that could kind of be just elbowing their way into the dating space?
I mean, we certainly pay attention to what Facebook is doing in dating. I think we're a little bit less probably concerned about it than, say, somebody like a Match would have to be, only because, Match is that very large corporate company to us, right? So, we've grown in the age of Tinder growing and Bumble growing. Bumble, of course, is a different brand, not Match, but we've grown in the age of these very large apps already. And so Facebook coming into the mix probably doesn't really change anything. Like, we've already got a pretty, we've kind of already found our niche, and I don't think Facebook's going after that. I think it's going after the more mass market. So if I were running Tinder or Bumble, I'd be more concerned about Facebook. That being said, I'm not sure how concerned about Facebook I'd actually be. I would have to pay attention, but Facebook doesn't have the greatest track record for entering a new space, right? Like, they say, oh, well, they've built at least a half dozen, maybe a dozen or more standalone apps. How many of those can you name? Right? Like, none. Or how many of those are in your phone? At least none. As far as apps that they bought, of course, that's totally different, right? Like Instagram and so forth, WhatsApp. But they haven't really expanded into a new space. But what they have proven they can do is if they see a feature that's working in social, like on Snapchat, they can co-opt it and put it in Instagram or potentially into Facebook. But I think that's different, right? Like, that's almost expected behavior. If you see a new messaging platform and you run if you see a new messaging feature and you run a messaging platform, you're probably going to experiment with it. Getting into dating is a little bit different because that's not why people are there, right? So, like, most people don't think about Facebook as the place they go to date, because there are so many different ways of going out and finding a date, whether especially mobile options. And so I tend to look at it as people use brands to kind of express different facets of their own personality. So, I use LinkedIn because it's my business space, and okay, I have some stuff to throw over the wall, this article, that podcast, I'll post that here. And my pictures will look very professional. But, my Facebook self, is probably going to be my 4-year-old, my 8-year-old, or my 12-year-old, right? That's more or less the only thing I post to Facebook. And then my Tinder or my MeetMe, I run these apps called MeetMe, Tag, Scout, Lavu, and so forth. Those are going to be a different persona. That's going to be my, nightclub, bar personality, like the maybe a little bit more, out there in terms of putting yourself out there. And I think that I think it's hard to say, well, and Facebook has proven that it can't be all things to all people, but it can own this friends and family space in a really absolute way. And I realize there's always fringes, right? Like, so you might own the friends and family space, and yeah, some people use Instagram to date, right? Some people reach out, like, but for the most part, like, it's not what you're there for, right? Like, if that's not the most efficient way to find a date, maybe you see someone and then you pursue their Instagram and then you try to reach out via it. But it's not the most direct way. So I think I don't think Facebook is like, I mean, you can never count out Facebook in any market, just given its scale and resources. But it just doesn't feel like the sort of thing people want Facebook for. And when those types of things have happened, that's not where Facebook has really shined. So I think that's the most likely. And certainly, if you look at Match's share price, investors on Wall Street at least seems to agree with that assessment. Like, Match is absolutely crushing it. There's obviously not much faith in the street that Match that Facebook poses an existential threat to Match. Maybe it does, but it certainly doesn't seem like it.
What's the future of dating? I know we've seen people go more and more into their phones, both in terms of dating and in terms of their everyday life, and also yet seem to be less happy in doing so. What's the future look like for that and hold?
I think, I think the trend in dating, if you look really across the app, so if you look at like Hinge is kind of part of it, and that's of course also a Match asset. Hinge basically started pioneering, more, kind of a more quality profile. So it's not just a list of information, but you're answering 3 questions, and these questions, are a little better than normal, like giving you a glimpse of the personality, and they also make for good conversation starters. Basically, just a higher quality profile that you could spend more time with, and when you like it, it's a little less superficial, because you're not just liking a pretty picture, you're liking, maybe something that it required a little bit of wit. And you see, Bumble, and you see, I think Tinder, but certainly Bumble, kind of following that trend of just ever increasing, kind of more time-consuming profiles to create, more high-quality profiles to look at. And we've kind of, what we've been doing on the video side is almost part of the same story, right? Like, we didn't come at it from the profile as much as just saying, like, look, people want authentic conversations. One of the biggest problems with dating is, or dating apps is, you don't know if the photo is very old. You don't know if the photo is even the person. It's not necessarily a great view of, you don't have a good sense of who the person is from looking at their profile. And so you got Bumble and you got Hinge and others kind of looking at that problem and saying, well, let's have better quality profiles. And that's certainly one way of doing it. I think I've seen reputation scores on, like, how good is this person's reputation. I've even seen, I forgot the app that does it, but like, well, how does this person do when you see them in real life? Like, is it what you expected? Did they treat you well in real life? So kind of really trying to close the loop. We've taken a different look and said, look, if you want to get a sense of who someone is as fast as possible, go see them in real life. Of course, that would be the quickest way, but that also kind of defeats the purpose of the apps to begin with, which is convenience and put them right there. But then video. And so, we launched this live streaming video feature. I guess, we launched it around the middle of 2017. And, now we're doing, about almost 1 million, around 900,000 or so video viewers every single day. More than 20% of our audience on all of our US apps are engaging in this video and basically watching, each other and commenting and connecting that way. Maybe as a precursor to real life, our users are still connecting in real life. But I think it's just people want that raw or more authentic feeling than just a collection of, here's my stats, I'm single, I'm this age, here's my interests in keyword form, like that's old and uninteresting. And I think, people are trying to come up with interesting ways. I think video is going to be a big piece of it, but I don't think it's the only piece.
How do algorithms play in, and how close are we to an AI matchmaker?
Yeah, I mean, with algorithms, it's interesting in dating because it's certainly not an unsolvable problem, but it's a more difficult one than the Netflix problem, right? Because in the Netflix problem, you basically have this history of things you like to watch, and they, of course, know what you go see the next, and they know what other people have watched, and the movie doesn't have to like you back, right? And so that does create a lot of complexity in that the movie has to like you back, and then the movies can't like if you meet someone and she's interested in you and you're interested in her, that's kind of subtractive from everyone else. It's not like you can then take the fact that she's interested in people like you and the next day show her someone else like you, because that's not really how it works. And so I think there's still this serendipity in connecting. I think these algorithms are important. I mean, there's probably certainly age, gender, location, probably some background is helpful, but like there's a reason, there's a spark, right? Like people either feel that spark or they don't. And I don't think we're very close to an algorithm that accurately predicts that spark. I think we are pretty good at kind of connecting you to people, giving you context for why that connection has been made, but no one's claiming like, and like the eHarmony sort of thoughts of like, and we have these data scientists and they're so smart, and we've and this person's the one for you, whether you know it or not, right? I think it's more like we can get you, the serendipity is always going to be a big piece of it, but we can help that serendipity along.
Yeah, might as well add a little chemical luck to the mixture, so to speak.
Yeah.
So with this, how do you think about the apps? In my opinion, I feel like some of the apps, Tinder specifically, there's been a commoditization of sex, so to speak, in terms of dating apps and online applications in general.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, certainly that's a critique, of the ecosystem, right? Like, you simply have so many choices, and you didn't used to have all of these choices. And so even when you're with someone, the fact of the matter is, there's many different choices. And, it's potentially an issue, but I mean, it's one of choice, right? So it's not, I wouldn't call it one of the bigger problems facing mankind, but I do get that critique. I think it, to some degree, kind of this push towards more individualized profiles that you see most of the brands doing are kind of addressing that a little bit, right? Because they're saying like, look, each profile is not the same. It's not just a picture and some keywords. It's these are unique people. I do think video plays a role in that, because like every video is so different, and you could see it, like if there's a spark. You might think there would be a spark if you saw a collection of photos, but the second she opens her mouth, you might say, "Oh, no way!" Right? And so I think it's more revealing, a medium. So I don't think. I think that can be a concern for some, but I think a lot of people are still looking for that quality relationship, and so I don't get the sense really that everyone just feels like they have to go from one person to the next.
I think it creates a similar dynamic, though, the comparison shopping, so to speak, to Instagram. So you kind of have to show off your very best self, and there's always better possible images. And oh, Jesus, Jesse's over there going to see the video, going to see this movie, and this guy's over at that concert. God, my life must suck compared to them. I feel like it creates a lot of the same unhappiness biases with people and with partners.
think there's potentially some truth in that. I think it goes further. Like if you're on Facebook, and I find myself, sometimes asking, like, why am I posting this picture, this vacation picture with my kids, into Facebook, right? Like, what is the reason that I'm doing this? And I think most of the reason, at least the reason I tell myself is, look, because I'd like to remember this. I'd like to have some storage of this. And frankly, I know that my devices are very ephemeral, and so is my storage capacity on my computer. Throw it into here, I'm making a bet on Facebook, but it'll probably be really element too, so that others can like it and so forth. But at least for, like, I would say the vast majority of anything I post, it actually, I find most of the benefit in the fact that it's here and, there's a handful of people who could see it. So, if there were, a more competitive social ecosystem, you can imagine, well, maybe there'd be a different product for me. But as it is, it's kind of just Facebook. And so I use it that way. And then you could say, well, yeah, but then there's 200 followers who don't particularly want to see that you're in a really nice spot, and maybe they're not, right? And so then that causes issues of vanity. And so I think, which is presumably one of the main reasons Facebook works. And I looked at, it wasn't that long ago that Reid Hoffman was talking, I think in the Times or somewhere, about how he only invests in startups that exhibit one of the 7 deadly sins, right? And that seems like something you wouldn't say today, but it's probably true, right? Netflix exhibits sloth. Facebook started potentially as lust with the Facebook, and then moved into vanity. LinkedIn, you could argue, is greed. But that's the ones that's what plays, right? The lowest common denominator, Tinder, of course. That's what plays, because we're human beings. And I don't know that what's going on, like, if you look at kind of sensational, a lot of this comes down to sensationalism. Like, there's been sensational headlines from the, as long as there's been journalism, right? Like, and so, and now I think the problem is it's gotten much, much worse, because we carry these devices in our pockets. They know a lot about us and what our clicking habits are. They play to outrage, of course, because that's what gets you to spend a little bit of incremental time. And so all of these things are kind of arrayed. There might have always been clickbait headlines, but you only really got them when you pass the newspaper stand. Well, now you're always looking at your device, and yet somehow it's not the device makers that are really under the gun; it's the social guys, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah, that is definitely a dynamic that people don't really unpack enough. We just build the hardware seems to be a good enough excuse, but
Right.
We just build the software isn't a good enough excuse. It's
Right.
it's a little bit interesting. I think that would be something.
It's worse than that. We just build the hardware and make all the software makers pay us.
I think the trick for a cell phone is to turn off notifications for everything. And once you pretty much have, except for maybe like WhatsApp text messages, because that's really all you need. If you get notifications, you're kind of, I mean, for lack of a better term, you're somebody else's bitch. So someone's calling you and you have to hop on whatever that is in terms of the notification. It just disrupts people's lives.
That's not a bad hack.
Yeah.
Not a bad hack.
So podcasting, what's the deal? Why'd you guys get into podcasting?
Yeah, so I guess it came out of a few different things. Like, one is we're into live video, right? Like, we're into video in a big way. Video is this very much immersive experience where, like, if you're not watching the comment stream and the streamer, you can't really follow along. We got the concept for video out of spending a lot of time in Beijing in 2016 and seeing it work on Momo and some other apps. And then we were looking at, and we obviously continue to keep an eye on the whole Chinese ecosystem of live streaming. And you basically can't find one. There's many different multi-billion-dollar Chinese live streaming apps, but you can't find any that don't have an audio component, and generally a pretty significant one. And so, that's fine. But then if you start thinking, well, gee, what could you do in audio in the United States? Because there's a difference between the Chinese population, of course, and the US. There's some certain audio networking that I just don't think would play here that does play over in China.
What do you mean?
So like you go into a meet new people room and you see neither video nor photos, and you just chat, kind of a chat line. And like I think something like that could work here. I think it'd be niche-y. There's probably a market for it, but in China, it's actually really popular. And I think it's known that some cultures are just more likely to be more willing to express themselves in audio than in text form, or maybe even in video form. So, sending even just voice SMS is something that's in many countries like very popular, but here it's not. Right, like that's not a very frequent use case, and so it is with kind of voice-based social networking. It's not really an idea whose time has come, I think, here. And so we were looking at audio and we're like, well, yeah, we could do something like that, but we didn't really have much conviction on that working. And then I'm an avid podcast listener, and I was also at the time kind of giving a speech at Princeton about a year ago. And part of the purpose of the speech was to say, like, if you were to start an app today, what would you start? And like, that's where the idea of this incented listening platform came from. And so, then, we have 21 teams, 21 tech and engineering teams here at the Meet Group. One of them is on, and an offshore one at that is on this. So I wouldn't overstate our ambitions here. 17 out of 20 are on live. 17 out of 21 are on live streaming. But that's what kind of got me into it. Was like, here's an idea that you have this massive industry of podcasting that is still very new. I mean, a lot of Americans do it, but it's still like a business in terms of revenue. And you have, I think, at least I have conviction that it's going to grow bigger, and probably much, much bigger. And so, it's probably not going to be 25 or 30% of listeners who listen in a month like it is today. It's probably going to be, 70% or 60, 70%, when it gets to full penetration. So that would mean that there's, of our 15 plus million monthly users that we have across our apps, there's a good portion of them who are either very casual or semi-frequent or infrequent or not at all kind of podcast listeners that we might be able to get to listen to podcasts. And I've been in the virtual currency space since 2007 or 8.
What got you into it?
When I ran my yearbook, we had a virtual currency called Lunch Money, and it was just an engagement currency that would allow you. It was probably one of the first ones on the internet, but at least in social, that would allow you to buy certain things in the app, that would allow you to spend it. One of the things you could buy was actually profile photos. It was kind of this little game called Owned, but it was a bunch of different uses for this Lunch Money, and it was a very good driver of action. And so I was aware of something called Sweatcoin, which is basically an incented walking platform. And I've recently actually become aware. I wasn't aware when we started the Podcoin, but I was aware of this, recently became aware of this Chinese company that is a multi-billion-dollar news aggregator. And their shtick is that it's basically loyalty points that you earn by kind of getting your headlines here as opposed to there. And so I felt like Podcoin, which basically pays you to listen to podcasts in a currency called Podcoin that you could redeem for Starbucks gift cards or Amazon, was actually kind of a of the moment sort of idea. By that I mean, like, can you add social into podcasting and at the same time reward your listener for being there? I think one of the criticisms of social media firms is that they take all of the value, right? All of it, and they don't share it like a single bit, and it's not part of their model to share any of it. And in our live streaming business, it is our model to share. Well, it's our model to share 30% with Apple and Google, but then to share half the rest with the creator. And that's how we built an $80+ million revenue live streaming business very quickly. Was because we were paying the creators. And so it seemed to me like Podcoin was like the next version of that, where you don't pay the creators, but you pay actually one step further. You're paying the end user, the listener, the consumer. And loyalty points is not something that's super innovative. Of course, there's loyalty points in many different industries, but there wasn't one in podcasts until Podcoin. And so that's what got us into that. It started as an experiment. It continues to be, I think, an experiment, but it's one that's, at least at the moment, going pretty well.
And conceptually, the idea is, instead of having advertising, people are incentivized to listen and then get some type of reward loyalty points from ideally someone who's advertising to have themselves as the reward loyalty company, like Starbucks.
It could go there, and that's closer to how Sweatcoin's doing it. I actually think the monetization at scale would look like little differences in Podcoin earning is enough to drive significant differences in what people listen to.
Okay, advertising.
Right. So in right now you have this really tiny podcast publisher space. In the future, you may have these podcast publishers who are actually willing to advertise in order to go get new listenership. And I wrote a middle grade children's book not that long ago, and have some familiarity with Goodreads. Goodreads is basically Amazon. Has this program or this site, which is kind of a social community around books, and they let you, as the author, kind of give away your title to an audience that's supposedly influencers and people who at least maybe find some resonance with your book, and maybe then chat about it. And podcasts don't really have anything. It's just like that, right? Like, if you want people to put your podcast in front of someone, like, no one really tells you.
Discovery has got awful in podcasting.
So the thought was, maybe we could help with that. And now we have hundreds of podcasters, a week, in some cases hundreds a day, kind of joining the service, which is all free. Everything right now is 100% free, claiming their podcast and then putting that claimed podcast go into the bonus. So they earn at a slightly higher rate. Not really all that meaningfully higher, but enough so that 30% of all listening minutes go to the bonus podcasts. And these people are just discovering podcasts they wouldn't have otherwise listened to, and then they continue listening to them even when the thing's no longer in the bonus. And so it's just another way. Right now, in a standard podcast player, you would come in and you'd look at whatever that app thinks is the top trending, or the ones that you're likely to stick on. And that's probably one of 500 podcasts that everyone knows and everyone already has all the same content. Well, we're actually showing you the ones you've probably never heard of. Maybe the likelihood that you stick on any individual one of them as a result might be a little lower. But if you don't like that experience as the user, you don't have to listen to any of the bonus podcasts. It's just, but we do highlight them.
So you brought up a little bit earlier kind of interest in cryptocurrencies/blockchain. What are your thoughts today?
I actually don't have much interest in cryptocurrency or blockchain. We did look at it a little bit at one time, and decided not to kind of pursue it. Podcoin's not a crypto; it's an engagement currency. I think when we looked at it, the the legal framework is just really difficult. I mean, for one, right? There's probably other criticisms to make, but like, are the tokens, are they tokens, or are they securities, right? And pretty much they're securities, no matter what you want to say they are. They're probably securities, and yet they don't behave in certain ways like you want a security. If they are securities, they're incredibly difficult to distribute legally. And then if you are to do it that way, you might as well just do like an IPO. And so, you know, as a public company, like there was no way we were going to touch that third rail of an ICO. And we're glad that we didn't, you know, frankly. We've looked at a bunch of these that we might have even been contacted by, and that didn't seem like they ended very well. That being said, blockchain, of course, is different. Blockchain may well find, as a technology, is finding footing. Whether it has really straightforward social ramifications is less obvious. Like, do people want all of their whatever they put into the ether persisted forever, right? Like, maybe
Facebook.
Right. Maybe, in some limited cases, but it's not an obvious. There's not like an obvious, oh, blockchain social makes a lot of sense. Like blockchain and finance, makes a lot of sense, and maybe certain betting platforms, right? Like, but never say never. Might find some formulation in social, but I wouldn't know what it is.
I think the formulation for social would be, here's your incentive to switch to something else, even though it sucks, to essentially get new user adopted type points faster.
Yeah,
than other
to like earn money.
Yeah, earn your equity in the new
network,
Facebook. Yeah. That's kind of where I would see the potential value of it. I feel like you could probably gamify it other ways, but it's one of those things, overhyped short term, possibly underhyped long term, but again, we don't know until we actually get there.
Yeah, I mean, in the podcast space, like, that's kind of what we're doing, right? We're giving you a virtual currency, which has value, in order to move your listening minutes here, or if you don't listen, to discover podcasts here. And I think that works in part because podcasts, all these podcast players have very similar podcasts, or at least total selection. They might highlight different ones, but they have similar selection. In the social case, you'd be going into a network and you might be incented to go there, but you're not going to be incented that much, right? Like it'll be pennies probably per day tops. So, but you're incented somewhere, and then they don't have your friends. And so like, probably
but you're incented to bring your friends. So you bring your friends, and then your money becomes more valuable and their money does. So it kind of, it has a built-in Ponzi scheme effect that could be beneficial with breaking a monopoly. It also could be very illegal with breaking a monopoly as well. But it's one of those things where, if you think about it, it has,
you also have a lot of
ramifications.
Yeah, it does. You can't.
Basically, they broke all the rules. They broke all the laws to be able to do what they did, and that's why a lot of it hasn't taken off.
Yeah, like there's this TCPA that has to deal with like who you can send text notifications or phone calls to. So like, going down the address book, like there was a time and place where you could build hyper viral, and that was on the back of Facebook when its APIs were very open. And it was in the very earliest days of mobile address books before people really understood the ramifications. And now you can't. Like I unless you're probably breaking some laws. That's kind of what I think. If you want to spread now, it's got to be through novelty or just through word of mouth spread. It's not going to be just because you hacked some existing platform.
Yeah, LinkedIn I think was like the first to do it. They basically emailed every person in your email list. It was a little bit crazy. What technology are you most excited about today, and why?
I think we're probably most excited about just the speed, right? Like 5G and like, the ability to just have more and more bandwidth, and not have to worry, oh, am I on a Wi-Fi network? And oh, I can't download this until I find my Wi-Fi, or I better not stream that because I don't want my bill to be too high. Like if you're thinking down the video space, this is still pretty meaningful. I think so. I'd probably say that from a business perspective.
And
You know,
personally?
personally, I'm probably relatively limited in terms of, um, you know, I don't, I probably try to keep, um, anything that could help me spend less time with a device is probably a good innovation. But maybe a safe that I could put in my house and put my devices in. I've thought of doing that, but it's not at the moment. I've never been able to pull myself to actually do that.
Just go airplane mode.
Yeah, yeah. Occasionally, I will get into just turning off Wi-Fi on my laptop. Like if I want to get 2 hours of something done, um, just turn off Wi-Fi. I will do that occasionally. Not enough.
Yeah, it's crazy how we let notifications rule us.
Yeah.
What technology are you most worried about and why? Not as a business, but just in general.
Um, I would say I am pretty worried about the whole ecosystem of the mobile devices and notifications. I think what is the stat? It's like 150 times a day we check our devices, right? Like, and obviously we're doing it unconsciously. And it's easy to kind of understand how scary all of that is, right? Like, so you have the smartest people in the world pursuing driving a few minutes or a few seconds per session and extra sessions per day, as opposed to whatever other problems they could be solving that might have, like global warming or some big cancer, something that is maybe really big. And the reason is because there's more money in finding a few more seconds a day per session, and those aren't really all that interesting challenges, right? So I'm worried about that ecosystem, and then I think as you look further out, you can't dismiss, people who kind of ring the alarm bell of existential risk and say, like, eventually you're going to have an AI that you're not going to want, and I think there's a lot of people who say, well, yeah, that's ridiculous. The AIs today, aren't very sophisticated. But the trend seems to be going there, and so I think that's worthy of people like Elon Musk's concern. I'm not sure that I'm overly concerned with it, but that's the nature of why these present risk, because they're hard risks to us to deal with on anything like an individual level, and then one day through actions of all these concerted actions of people that were not thinking in this, that this would ever happen, suddenly it emerges.
Yeah, it's like that proverb about the doubling the numbers of pieces of rice on the chessboard. Then the prince said, "I'll give you anything you want. Just double it on every single new block." And suddenly it was all the rice from the kingdom. And that's
Yeah,
that's
right.
kind of how exponential tech, exponential anything works. People don't
Yeah.
think about it as often. So
Right.
outside of your work, what do you do on a weekly, daily basis to stay informed and stay up to date? I know you said you like podcasts.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly listen to a lot of podcasts. I think, probably my news diet looks like podcasts, Washington
What are
Post,
your
New York
favorite
Times.
podcasts?
Um, you know, my favorite podcast right now, I'm actually looking at my list because it's fairly, I think, like, for example, I'm listening to Without Fail by Gimlet. I'm listening to, I do have the Daily. There's something interesting about the Uyghur population recently in China. That's actually an interesting story. The surveillance state of China, and how they use all this tech and image recognition to really keep tabs on this ethnic minority, and in addition to the majority. Certainly I will at least occasionally listen to Joe Rogan. I actually have the Mike Tyson podcast on here, and I do like that. There's history ones I'm into. Until I really liked until he moved to Luminary. History on Fire one, and I probably won't pay Luminary to listen to it.
Oh, that's a good thing. Do you think not it's a good thing not paying, but just in general, do you think podcasting, do you think content in general will become that more individualized, paid for it approach, or if we'll stick with some type of advertising model, which is what we've had to date?
I think it's hard to say that there won't be podcasts that you pay for, but I don't think that's not where I'd place my bet. I think I'd probably place the bet the opposite of how Luminary places its bet. So Luminary says, I can paywall off a bunch of content and then get you to pay for it, and that runs into all sorts of problems. Like, well, all the other content you think you're going to have is not there, because no one wants to deal with a company that does that. Then you have Spotify coming at it from an unknown spot, right? We don't know if they're going to paywall off Parcast and Anchor and everything else that they acquired. Are they going to paywall it off, or is it just about moving as much of their music listening minutes to podcast listening minutes, in which case they benefit big time? Now, I think they will certainly start to paywall things off. If I had to guess, Spotify is the one who's going to be really paywalling this off, and but it probably won't be everything they bought. It might be the bleeding edge of it, and I think I have a hard time believing that people with podcasts seem like they want to say like it's going to get to 70% terrestrial, just like because people listen. 70% of Americans listen to terrestrial radio. Podcast is on its way there. It's already better content.
Yeah, the radio sucks. It's all ads too.
It's terrible, right? And so it's going to get there, but we're going to charge them, and like not too many people pay for XM and Sirius and compare not the same company, but in relation to
they pay taxes for radio.
Yeah, I'm not sure they perceive it that way though. But so I think I think advertising is going to be a big part of it. I think Spotify is the monster player in this space. I don't think Apple probably jumps in too much more than they have, right? Like they seem like they've nursed this thing.
They totally blew it. They totally blew it. They could have owned it all.
They could have owned it all, but I'm not sure I would say they blew it, only because they also, by keeping it kind of at a distance, they let kind of an ecosystem develop. Whether they let it develop or intended to develop is a separate question. But an ecosystem developed, and Apple makes so much money that
until all the iPhone sales stop, which we've already hit peak right. iPhone and peak. Peak
even if this is a 10 times bigger business and Apple gets 50% of it, I'm not sure it really dramatically moves their needle. So, like, I'm not so sure. But other podcasts I like the type of podcast I like is like, I don't know if you listen to Bear Brook, but like these retellings of kind of local news, like it's a New Hampshire public radio thing. Another one is The Richest Hill by it was like about the Superfund site in Butte. I do like these really local things that you probably would never get except in podcast form, where like you hear about something that took place, either some period ago or even now, but that tells this really full story. And I think podcasts are just great at storytelling. I think for me at least, they've replaced audiobooks. Like I'll still listen to an audiobook every now and again, but it's probably 80% podcasts versus maybe more versus my audiobook diet. And back a few years ago, it might have been the other way.
Definitely the same. And I typically 2 or 3x the podcast speed as well, so you can listen.
Oh yeah,
you can really kill through some podcasts. That would get you some great Podcoins.
Yeah.
But yeah,
exactly.
I think if they are able to unify the big problem with podcasting is they don't have great stats in terms of being able to measure ad effectiveness. If they did and they were able to integrate all of that, you could be really, really successful. I could see podcasting out replacing television advertising in terms of total budget. Easy.
Yeah, I mean that's true. Like, I mean, you basically are limited because of the measurement problems to people using your code, and that's a very limited set of advertisers who are going to be able to play in that market. So you're not able to address kind of the masses.
Yeah, we'll see. It'll be an interesting space. I got two last questions for you. One is an interesting contrarian opinion that those around you don't hold, but you do. Some type of prediction.
Well, I have a prediction for Game of Thrones, but by the time this airs, I think it'll be known. So let me think of a different one. I mean, frankly, it's a little bit of a cop out, but I think the fact of the matter is, I've been pursuing video as uh, a major kind of investment vehicle, and no one else has, right? Like, especially in the dating space, and no one else seems to currently, right? Like, and so I think it's still contrarian to say that live streaming video and dating are ever going to really be mainstream. And we continue to believe that. If I was looking for a political sort of contrarian position, you know, yeah, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think there's so many different opinions. I'm not even sure what's contrarian.
That's pretty much what the pollsters realized.
Yeah.
So it's been fun having you on today. If you had to leave people with one thing before you tell them where to find you, a quote, a call to action, it can be anything. What would it be and why?
Um, listen to more podcasts. I think I think, and that's not just self-serving. Listen wherever, but I think that's an interesting media form in a world where like everybody, even like these outlets that you might think are good, just want to get your attention with like the most ridiculously worded headline. And then for people who sometimes just read the headlines, like they're just consuming constant outrage and moral harm. And podcasts, because they're 30 plus minutes long typically anyway, and sometimes much longer, you know force you to kind of deal with different thoughts on an issue that I think I think is really positive. Like long form content that makes you think is pretty rare, and somehow podcasts have that. And I'm sure there's going to be some terrible podcasts, and I'm sure there already are, but maybe it eventually all just becomes its own ecosystem or echo chamber. But I don't think of it that way right now, and maybe there's still some hope for that medium.
Time adds context. When you have to be short and snappy, you get short and snappy back. When you have the
Mm.
context to talk to people, you can see, holy shit, we're actually all people. What the hell? And
Right.
a lot of problems just kind of fade into the background. Geoff, thanks for coming. Where's the best place for people to find you and learn more?
You can
And
find me
find
on
their loved one, of course.
you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Geoff Cook, GeoffCook, or grab our apps, Podcoin or MeetMe on App Store or Play Store.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in. Hope this has been fun, guys. It's been an alternative different one, but I think we're headed towards some alternative different futures, so it's worth discussing. Thanks. And thanks for
Thanks for
tuning
having
in.
me.
Yeah, cheers. Awesome. That was good.
Good.